She cut down my trees to get a lake view, and now she's being sued by the federal government. You know that kind of person who thinks that everything in the world is as customizable as a Pinterest feed? Well then, the new neighbor arrived in the neighborhood with that energy. From day one, she walked the sidewalks like she was already mentally reforming everything. She pointed at the houses, commented on the roofs, praised gardens with potential, and uttered phrases like, "That would be wonderful here," with a European touch. Always with that smile that doesn't convince even a plantation scarecrow. When she bought the house at the end of the street, everyone thought, well, there's another one with a control freak, but nothing that can't be solved by pruning her ego. But the woman was driven by something else: obsessive aesthetics and an extremely unhealthy relationship with the view. A view of the lake, the mountains, the sunset, other people's lives. It didn't matter. If there was something between her and the horizon, it became an urgent problem. And that's where my trees came in. 2 oaks and a magnolia, planted before I even moved here. 3 giant, imposing, beautiful trees, perfect shade in summer, golden leaves in fall, home to birds all year round. A spectacle of nature, and more than that, protected. Registered in a federal urban vegetation program. Nothing could be done without permission from the town hall, and I was proud of that. It was like having living monuments in my backyard, but to her, they were just visual obstacles. Vertical pollution, as she once called it in the neighborhood group. Yes, she used that term. She said the trees obstructed the view from her second-floor balcony. She complained about the shade, the height, even the noise of the branches when it was windy. One neighbor even laughed and asked if she would prefer the leaves to ask permission before falling. I ignored it. Because living in peace is sometimes just a matter of not giving the stage to people with frustrated landscape architect delusions. Then one day, I came back from the market and found my yard looking like a crime scene. Fallen branches, sawdust on the ground, the magnolia tree half gone, 2 chainsaws lying on the grass, and 2 guys in caps and uniforms looking like, I'm just following orders. My first reaction was to freeze. Then came the heat, the kind of anger that rises slowly, like a fever. I looked away, and there she was, with her arms crossed, smiling as if she had done me a kindness, as if she had freed me from a burden. She said it was just pruning, that the trees were already very old, and that she just wanted to open up the view of the lake a bit. The lake, which, by the way, you can barely see from her second floor. Just a little blue dot at the end of the street. She hadn't sent word. She didn't ask permission. She didn't call the town hall. She simply acted, as if the world was hers and everything around her was waiting to be adjusted to the will of her aesthetic ruler. The conversation was short, because if I stayed there, I might raise the tone beyond what my pressure would allow. I told her she would regret it, and I went in. Over the next few days, I tried not to let the rage consume me, but it was difficult. Every time I looked at the empty space where there had once been shadow, life, movement, I felt as if a piece of my history had been ripped out. And that's when the magic happened. When I checked the tree's documents, I found the protection registration. It wasn't just the municipality that considered them ecological heritage. It was the federal government. A specific law for the preservation of urban species in buffer zones of natural areas. The kind of law that doesn't give any leeway. With the protocol in hand, I called the environmental department, attached photos, videos, and witnesses, and the case was opened. A formal investigation, environmental crime, destruction of protected vegetation. What she thought was just cosmetic pruning became a case for the prosecutor's office. The notification arrived in her mailbox first. A white envelope stamped by the Department of Environmental Protection, all very official. And no matter how hard she tried to disguise it, I could perfectly see the frozen expression on her face when she opened the mail right there at the gate. The smile of someone who has ordered the trees to be pruned, like someone who orders a pimple to be removed from a mirror, turned into a poorly formulated grimace of someone who knows they've got themselves into the wrong place. Of course, She didn't give up in the first round. She spent the whole week walking down the street with that air of "don't do, don't fear," throwing loose phrases into the ears of anyone who was unfortunate enough to cross her path. He said that the trees were sick, that the felling was preventative, that I was exaggerating, that the city council was persecuting residents who just want to look after the street. It was a festival of poorly told excuses that no one could swallow, but everyone pretended to listen to so as not to get involved. But the story had taken on a proportion that went beyond the neighborhood gossip bubble. The environmental inspectors arranged a technical visit. They came in threes, with green vests, clipboard folders, and a drone. That's right, a drone. They flew over my yard, took photos, made measurements, and asked for details. The oldest of them just shook his head and took notes. The following week came the hearings. First administrative, then legal. The woman was summoned to give explanations. She tried to play it smart and showed up with a gardener from the neighboring town who claimed to have received orders to just prune. But the cut was complete, and pruning a protected tree without permission is already wrong. Cutting it down? It's asking to be swallowed up by the law. While she tried to explain herself with terms she didn't use properly, like functional aesthetic cleanliness and residential visual sustainability, the technicians presented reports, maps, and images that left no room for interpretation. The tree was cut down, yes. Without authorization, yes. In a protected area, yes. On her orders, clearly. And when the environmental prosecutor's office officially entered the case, everything changed tone. Because now it was no longer just about cutting down trees. It was about invading other people's property, causing ecological damage, failing to comply with federal legislation, and influencing third parties to commit environmental crimes. It was a combo worthy of those who think they are above nature and the law. And the woman, who once seemed to be parading in a garden of self-praise, was now barely able to keep up her rehearsed speech without stuttering. Meanwhile, the street watched. No one said anything publicly, but everyone knew. It was the veiled topic on the sidewalks, the exchange of glances at Sunday breakfasts, the whispers near the gate. People avoided positioning themselves, of course. Nobody wanted to become a target. But the discomfort with her attitude was as visible as the open clearing where the magnolia once stood. Even the HOA, always slow, always silent, started to move. They said they were going to revise their bylaws about interfering with neighboring property, that they would consider including clauses on environmental protection, and that they did not agree with the residents' isolated attitude. In other words, if the circus catches fire, the association has already warned that it won't lend a match. She tried to fight back. She sent an open letter to the neighborhood, 3 pages printed in Times New Roman font, full of words like visual enhancement, collective harmony, and proactive action to improve the landscape. It looked like a thesis on garden decoration, only with his ego inflated like fertilizer. Nobody replied. The letter became a joke. One of the wittier neighbors read it aloud at the weekend market. The laughter echoed louder than the street mower. But while the neighborhood laughed, things only got worse for her. On the 3rd week, the summons arrived, an official hearing with the public prosecutor. Environmental crime, however abstract it may seem, is taken seriously. And in this case, it involved protected vegetation, irreversible damage, and witnesses. Many witnesses. The woman who had cut down trees for aesthetics was now facing the real possibility of paying a 5-figure fine and, with luck, not receiving a court order for assisted replanting supervised by an environmental agency for 2 years. Yes, replanting, in the same place, under supervision. And if you fail, you'll have to answer for non-compliance. The Dream Garden has become a legal minefield. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday at 10 in the morning, and if anyone doubts that environmental proceedings can be dramatic, it's because they've never seen a woman trying to justify an ecological crime with the argument, "The tree was in the way of my meditation." She showed up with a pink briefcase, low heels, and a face like she hadn't slept in 3 days. She said she was being wronged, that she just wanted to enjoy the view, and that at no time did she imagine that 3 trees could cause so much trouble. The prosecutor, a dry and direct man, asked the obvious. You entered someone else's property, without permission, ordered the cutting down of listed vegetation, and now you want to absolve yourself of responsibility by claiming aesthetic ignorance? She replied with a shrug that didn't convince even her own lawyer. On the other side, the reports were piled up. The trees were registered as the city's plant heritage, part of a federal preservation program because they were in an environmental buffer zone. Cutting them down was tantamount to cutting down a historical heritage site, only alive. The public prosecutor's office asked, in addition to the fine, that she be forced to replant the species in the same place, with quarterly monitoring by a technical body and a mandatory visit from a biologist every 3 months. Yes, that's right. She would have to personally look after the new trees that would replace the ones she killed out of sheer vanity. When her lawyer tried to argue that his client had no technical knowledge, the prosecutor replied without blinking, she had enough knowledge to hire labor, invade private land, and issue clear-cutting orders. Technical ignorance does not exempt bad faith. Outside, the story had already spilled over from the neighborhood group. A small city newspaper published the story with the headline, Resident Destroys Protected Vegetation to Open View and Faces Environmental Lawsuit. The photo in the article was one that the drone had taken. The clearing in the backyard, the ground still marked by the chainsaws, and in the background, her house, with a view that barely justified the blink of an eye, let alone a crime. And with this visibility came social collapse. The neighbors, once shy, now spoke openly. Someone pasted a sheet on the HOA's bulletin board with the phrase, "A beautiful view does not hide an ugly character." Another made an online post showing the before and after of the cut, and the before and after of her morale in the neighborhood. Even the morning walking group decided to change their route. They now avoided passing in front of her house. They said that the energy of the street was disharmonized, which is just a poetic way of saying nobody can stand even her shadow anymore. In response, the woman locked herself away in her own world. She had a hedge installed around her balcony, ironically using native plants, as if trying to balance out the environmental karma. She canceled her yoga classes at home and only went out at night to take out the garbage and pick up the mail. Anyone who saw her said that her eyes were withered, the kind of look of someone who thought she lived in a margarine commercial and discovered the hard way that the real world charges. And it's expensive. In an attempt to repair his reputation, he sent a formal apology to the HOA, a printed text signed by hand saying that it recognized the excesses and that it was committed to restoring the ecological balance of the neighborhood. But it was too late. The HOA had already included a new clause in its bylaws. Any alteration to other people's vegetation will be considered a serious infraction, subject to a fine and formal complaint to the environmental authorities. In other words, everything she caused became law against her. But the best was yet to come. As part of a new environmental education program, the City Council announced the creation of small urban reforestation gardens with educational signs, informative QR codes, and the names of those responsible. And guess who was listed as an emblematic case of negative impact? That's right. The woman who wanted to see the lake was now the official example of how not to act with your neighbor's trees. She tried to argue that this was institutional defamation, but the town hall's response was subtle. They put up one of these signs right at the start of the new nature trail on the sidewalk of her street. Printed text, large font. This reforested space marks the importance of urban preservation and the consequences of its neglect. It was the most elegant take that the neighborhood has ever seen. She didn't react the day they installed the sign. She simply closed the curtain, which was, in a way, more dramatic than any verbal protest. It was the silence of surrender. The woman who thought she was giving orders, even to the shade trees now, couldn't even face her own gate. The sound of the drill installing the reforestation program sign sounded like funeral music to her ego. As the weeks went by, her yard became a reflection of defeat. Tall grass, accumulated leaves, overturned pots, and a permanent "nobody lives here" aura. People avoided commenting, but the subject still circulated in whispers and snickers. The woman who cut down protected trees out of vanity was now a reference point for environmental crime in conversations that began with, "Remember when?" The punishment meted out was exemplary. In addition to the fine, which was steep, more than $10,000, paid in installments with interest and requiring immediate compliance, she was obliged to replant the same species that had been destroyed, under technical supervision. Every month, an environmental engineer showed up to assess the development of the new seedlings. And the best part? She had to water them herself. She had to sign a monitoring form and attend a compulsory workshop on native vegetation and urban ecological impact. That's right. The woman who uprooted 3 healthy trees because she wanted to see the lake now spent her Saturday mornings learning about photosynthesis and carbon absorption in a room with 6 other people who had each committed some green infraction in the city. The whole neighborhood knew, not because she told, but because the city council, as part of the educational project, posted photos of the workshops, and in one of them, there she was, white cap, frowning, holding a shovel with a magnolia seedling next to it. The caption? Ecological repair in action. The irony wrote itself. The new trees began to grow slowly. The contrast was visible. In the middle of a yard that once exuded aesthetic control, fragile saplings were now growing, planted in wooden supports, tied with ropes and identification tags. Small, timid, but firm. And although they were there out of obligation, the truth is that they brought more beauty and meaning than any landscaping overhaul in her head. Meanwhile, the street moved on. People met again on the sidewalks. The HOA organized an afternoon of collective planting with children from the neighborhood, all excited, all instructed not to touch the trees in the house of the famous case. The event was a success. They distributed seedlings, taught the importance of preservation, and, without meaning to, reinforced what everyone already knew. The neighborhood no longer wanted her as a leader, advisor, or voice of opinion. She was still there, living, breathing, but invisible. No more invitations arrived. No note, no greeting. It was as if the trees had been the threads that supported what little social connection she still had, and by cutting them down, she had pruned what was left of her public image. And the most symbolic thing of all, the view of the lake remained practically the same. Because the idea that the trees blocked the horizon was just an exaggeration in her head. You only had to go up 2 steps from the balcony to see it. It had always been enough. But she'd rather destroy than adjust her own angle. And now she lives with what she planted. Literally. The protected bushes grow, slowly, unhurriedly. Each season, a little taller. With each visit from the inspector, they get closer to taking back the space that was theirs. And hopefully, one day, they'll be as big as before. The difference is that, this time, she'll be watching without doing anything, without being able to intervene, without giving her opinion. Because some lessons you learn by pruning, others with a fine, and some, as in her case, with a plaque right in front of the house, eternalizing the day when the desire to see the lake cost the respect of an entire neighborhood.